As the Presbytery of Philadelphia, we've been blessed with a rich heritage of pastoral leadership that spans more than 300 years. As descendants, as recipients, and as stewards of that leadership, we're creating a video library entitled Legacies in Leadership. It's our hope to be able to lift up the witness of leaders who've been pivotal in embodying the gospel of Jesus Christ in the greater Philadelphia area and beyond. We want to share their stories, know their stories, learn of their tenacity and the depth of their faith and witness. Many of these leaders will be individuals whose witness has been largely embodied on the margins and footnotes of our larger history. Our hope is to move those stories onto the main pages of our journey so that we might be both informed and inspired to press on at this time in history. It's clear that we stand on the shoulders of saints whose ministry touched the lives of so many. And today we want to claim their story as part of our own stories. Our initial series will focus on African American leaders who have been a bold and transformational presence in our midst. It's our hope that you will consider taking the time to listen, taking the time to hear the story of us as it has evolved over the decades. And may God continue to bless us with a courage, a faithfulness, and conviction to learn from our past as we seek to live into the hope of our tomorrow.
So thank you very much. It's my joy, my pleasure to introduce to everybody that's watching the Reverend Dr. Leonard Bethel. There are so many things in your resume. You are both a star athlete, you have a Doctor of Education from Rutgers University, of course you have an MDiv from Johnson C. Smith, so you've been a pastor, an educator, an author, you're a Woodrow Wilson Fellow at Princeton University. So with all these things, we are overjoyed that you have your membership in the Presbytery of Philadelphia as one of our minister members. And this is part of our series of having interviews with folks like yourself whose stories the rest of us need to know and hear. I want to say right off the bat that Ruth Santana Grace sends her greetings. It was her hope to be here for this interview because she knows that another thing that you have in common is that when she came into this presbytery, you have a personal relationship with her father as well.
Oh yeah. We've been in Presbytery together. Elizabeth, he was a firebrand.
Okay.
Yeah, he was something else. He fought the Latino question in the Presbytery.
Okay.
And he was tough. He was a tough man. I liked him a lot. He was tough.
Okay.
Yeah. Well, my educational experience, I think, will give you a sense of my journey. I was born in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, West Philadelphia, in February 5th, 1939. My mother, who was an educator, one of the first African-American teachers in the Philadelphia school system, went on and earned her doctorate and became a professor of English at Trent State and then at Temple University. My father was from the Caribbean, from the Bahamas, Nassau, Bahamas, and he was a tall man, 6'6", and his father was 6'8". His grandfather was Duncan Bethel, a British Jew, who was a part of the triangular slave trade. And he had a child by the woman from the Gambia, West Africa. And that's how our family started. But he would not marry her, which was typical. He married a British white woman, a blonde. Mm. And so in the Bahamas, there are two sets of Bethels. There's the black Bethels and the white Bethels, and all came from Duncan Bethel. Because of the dynamics of slavery, segregation, colonialism, the white Bethels put an extra L on the name. So when you go to the Caribbean, you see Bethell, they're the white Bethels, and Bethel, the black Bethels. But one Bethel came to Philadelphia before they changed it to the two L's. It was Captain Richard Bethel. He had a son, Richard Bethel Jr., at Central High. I passed exams back in the 50s. You know, Central was probably the top high school in the country at the time.
Mm-hmm.
And you had to have a certain IQ to get in and all of that. And he was my classmate, Richard Bethel, and I was Leonard Bethel. We both were over 6 feet, you know, and but he was blonde, very popular with the girls at Girls High. He wouldn't associate with me. We were on a swim team together, but he wouldn't even speak to me. And one day we were, after practice, we both stayed in the shower. It was, you know how long you have to stay in the shower after a swim practice until everybody left. He was at one end of the showers and I was at the other. And he said, "You're Leonard Bethel." I said, "Yes." You're Richard Bethel. I said, he said, "Who's Henry Bethel?" I said, "That's my father," because he was the only other Bethel in the Philadelphia phone book along with Richard. I said, "Who's Captain Richard Bethel?" He said, "That's my father." I said, "Where's your father from?" He said, "Nassau, Bahamas." I said, "Mine is also." He did. Because he was blonde and blue-eyed and so on, he kind of turned a little red. And then I said, "Have you ever heard of a Duncan Bethel?" He says, "Yeah, that's my great-grandfather." I said, "Well, it's mine too." And he turned like an apple. He turned his back on me. And now this is the 50s when we didn't associate. And it was only a few blacks there who could get into Central. But we made up all the athletes. I was an all-conference tackle. I broke the school record in shot put. I made the Collins-Bittenberg trophy. You had to have a B average to get that. And but when we walked down the hallway and he was with his friends, he would go one way if he saw me. He didn't want them to know we had any association. This is the history of our country, this kind of thing. But growing up in West Philly, my mother was a feminist. And so she had my brother and I born at the women's hospital. It was no longer in existence. They would not allow women doctors to work at Penn and Temple. And so my mother didn't tolerate that. And now they closed that down when they started admitting women. And there were only 2 black women who had MDs, and they worked at the women's hospital. So we were born there, and we grew up in the row house in West Philadelphia. I played stickball and wall ball. I was a street kid, you know. And then we moved to Germantown. My father, you know, West Indian man, we were big on business. He was a failure of the British school system. My mother made him go back to school at night to learn. They stopped that Gullah Geechee, whatever talk that was to speak, because she was an English teacher. And she wanted him to speak proper in English to have influence on my brother and I. And so he went in, and then he went to dental technician school, then he got into real estate. He did well. So we moved to Germantown to a 3-story house on Oxford Street. Okay. And that was an interesting experience. I was at Central High. My brother went to Germantown High. We sort of believed in, our father did push athletics on us. He played rugby and cricket and tennis, that, you know, the British stuff. And so when I went through Central, I was in my senior high at Central High School. I had a confrontation with a chemistry teacher. And here I was, I had to be average. I won the Collins-Bittenberg trophy. And the chemistry class had lecture and lab. And in the lab, I had an A. This was from one other teacher. And he failed me for a lecture. And I said, well, it's the same thing. So he gave me a D, and I said, this will affect my graduation. So I had money in my savings from somewhere. I left Central my senior year. They hated that. This is after winning all conference football in my spring year. I went to Lincoln College preparatory. I wanted, and my parents didn't agree with what I was doing. Go and finish up Central as well. And so they accepted all my credits from Central. I went to Lincoln College Prep and graduated #1 in the class.
All right.
And then I got all of these scholarships to play football at Temple and all of the, and so I said, listen, I had such a challenging experience with race at Central High School. So it was only 0.02% of us black. We had to eat together at lunchtime, so we didn't integrate, you know. And so I said, I'm going to Lincoln University. Because the people wanted me to go to admit to play football at Temple and so on. So I went to Lincoln, all African-American male, and my brother was there. He was a student there. So I went, I liked that. I never had a black teacher. And they saw these black professors. I said, I've never seen that before, a black PhD. And so I went to Lincoln. It was God save for me, because it was the civil rights movement going on. It was 1958, 59. And so I went there, and it kind of gave me an uplift. And I got involved in athletics, and so I wanted to become a lawyer. I was a political science major, and I did pretty well academically. I played 3 sports. I was football, heavyweight wrestling, and track. To make a long story short, in 4 years, I was a leading javelin, discus shot, and shot putter for the track team. I beat the seniors in my freshman year. I was all-conference tackle. And I was a 2-time semifinalist heavyweight wrestler. Years later, they inducted me in the Athletic Hall of Fame. In fact, if you go to Lincoln University now and look in the gym, there's a picture of me flying in the banner. And when I finished Lincoln, Dr. Samuel G. Stevens, Presbytery minister, was a chaplain. Okay. He took an interest in me. He would come to all the home games, and he would invite me over to the house. Ms. Stevens would make cookies and milk, and he would tell me all the things I did wrong because he played football. And I said, Dr. Stevens, I think I want to follow what you're doing. I want to become a minister. But I was a member of the Seventh-day Adventist Church. Mm-hmm. My mother was Seventh-day Adventist. My grandmother was Seventh-day Adventist. My brother was Seventh-day Adventist, and we would go to church on Saturday. And I said, well, Saturday is the Sabbath, it's a day of worship. Sunday is not, you know, we used to get into all of that. But I said, Dr. Stevens, he said, well, the Presbyterian Church is kind of academic, you got to do it. I said, I'll take on the challenge. I like to do what you're doing. And so he said, well, first I want you to take Hebrew and Greek. And I took Hebrew and Greek in my senior year at Lincoln University under Dr. He was a Greek and Hebrew scholar. And I said, I want to preach in a black church. I don't want to deal with it. And I came over to Princeton. I didn't feel right over back in those days, in the, 1961, and they're doing the civil rights movement. I said, I don't think I can get what I want here. I want to help my people. And so Dr. Stevens said, well, you can come on to Lincoln Seminary, because he was on the faculty there. And but the Presbyterian Church closed Lincoln down. They said Princeton can take on the minorities and so on. And then I said, that's a bunch of baloney. It didn't happen. and so he said, the only other seminary is Johnson C. Smith. Well, it so happened that the vice president for business was visiting Lincoln, and Dr. Stevens told him about me. He came to me, he says, I like your academic record. I see you're an all-conference athlete. And he says, we'd love to have you at John C. Smith. And I said, well, I hate the South. I don't want to go south. He said, we'll give you a full scholarship, tuition. So I said, that'd take pressure off my family. So I accepted tuition free and room and board free. So I went. And interestingly enough, during my early years, I was involved with Marjorie Penny Pushkin, a Quaker woman at the Fellowship House in Philadelphia. And I got on the staff, just doing voluntary work with athletics. They had a farm, the Fellowship Farm, and I would sponsor all the sports programs. Well, she was very friendly and a close friend of Martin Luther King Jr. Martin Luther King Jr., when he got out of the Montgomery jail, came to Philadelphia for a Northern Initiative. And he was to speak at the Fellowship House. And Marjorie Penny says, when Dr. King comes, Len, you take him up to the meeting room, give him coffee and cookies and before he speaks. So there was a little girl that I was interested in, not my wife at the time, and I wore my Central Heart, that crimson and gold colors. I had a big varsity letters from football, swimming, track on, and so I wanted to impress this girl. So I got on the elevator with Martin Luther King Jr., and going up, he looked at me, he said, very impressive, very impressive. And so we got up, and I was sort of fidgety. He said, come here, son, sit down. He said, now, I know what you're going through. I was there once. He said I brought in coffee. He said, you go right on downstairs. I know what you're looking at. I know what He was very perceptive. So I went on downstairs. Margie Penny said, where's Dr. King? I said, he's up in the waiting room. Why aren't you up there? And I said, well, he said, I could come down here. He said, you're missing an opportunity of lifetime. You should have a pen and pencil and writing down and so. And I said, I'll go back. He said, no, you stay right here. I'm going up. You had your chance. Well, she was really angry at me. Well, long story short, 4 years later, when I was graduated from Lincoln University, Martin Luther King was the graduation speaker, and he got an honorary Doctor of Humane Letters. And afterwards, everybody crowded. We threw our hats in the air. We were inspired by getting involved in the civil rights movement. And I went up to him, and people were crowding around him. He kind of pushed aside. He said, come in. He said, the sweater. He remembered. He said, the sweater. I said, well, Dr. King, I got admitted to theological seminary to study from Presbyterian ministry. And he said, he grabbed me and hugged me. He said, welcome to the struggle.
Wow.
And that's what I did. I went down and got involved in the civil rights movement right away, and picketing and so on. And that's how I met my wife. Her classmate was a football player, versus playing in practice. The Presbyterian Hospital in Charlotte, North Carolina, would not admit him beyond the emergency room, and he died in the emergency room, bled to death. And so Andrew Young came and organized with the students from Davidson College, Johnson C. Smith, and so on. I was about 4 or 5 marches behind Veronica, my wife. I didn't know her at the time. And here comes this guy. I was 6'4" at the time. I'm not 6'4" now. I was 6'4" at the time, all conference and athlete and so on. This guy came, he was about 6'2". He started punching her and beating her and kicking her when she hit the ground. I said, forget this turn to cheek stuff. In fact, I told Martin King, I said, Dr. King, I'm not much in favor because I'm a street kid. I grew up in West Philly fighting in the streets, and I playing football and so on. I don't know about this turn. He said, you'll learn. But I didn't. I went for that guy. My class, my schoolmates in seminary grabbed me and said, get him out of here. Andrew was like, get him out of here. And threw me in the car and sent him back to campus. The guy turned, the Klansman turned and said, we're coming for you. I said, I'll be waiting for you. I went back to campus and found me a 2x4 stick. And I went and stood in the entrance and they were going to fight. And when my schoolmates came back from the protest, they said, Bethel, they don't fight with sticks. They said, come and blow you away. They said, the guy had a gun. He would have shot you. He wouldn't have fought you. He would have shot you. And so, my wife had face swollen. She was beaten up. She was healing up in the dormitory. And long story short, he beat her so bad she had spinal cord injury that years later she could hardly move her arm. So she's today carrying 10 plates, 10 screws, and 2 titanium plates, a bone from her hip and a cadaver bone. And she suffers from that. Outside of her fall and breaking her hip, she's suffered with that for years. But that was one time I almost got shot twice. One, I went into a segregated restaurant near the campus of John C. Smith, and I sat at the counter where it said white only, and the owner said, you can't sit here. I said, why can't you? He says, Negro, you can't sit here. And he went and got a shotgun pointed at me. So a man, well-dressed, came up to me and said, come, walk with me, man, please, just. So I walked with him. He said, listen, I'm Jewish. I had to change my name. I have a business downtown in Charlotte. We can't even have a bagel shop here. And he said, they knew I was Jewish, they burned my store. He said, you seem intelligent. That man's ignorant. Why die for him?
Wow.
And so he walked me, he said, I'll walk you back to camp. He walked me back to campus. Then I had a preaching assignment for my field work at a black Presbyterian church in Statesville, North Carolina. And I went there the first time. They got on the bus. I was well dressed. I had a little cap on. I had my Bible. And I went and sat behind the driver. He got up and said, "Negro, you can't sit there." He said, "White only." I said, "I don't know what that means." He said, "You can't sit there." And so I said, "No, I sat there." And there was a few whites sitting. He said, "Y'all move back. This is a dumb Negro." And he went and got a policeman. The policeman came with his gun drawn. He put it to my temple. He says, "Nigger, you can't sit there." And I said, "What's a nigger?" He said, "You trying to get smart with me?" And the bus driver said, "Listen, put your gun away. He's a dumb Negro. Let's let him sit there." And so when I got to Statesville, somehow the people found out about it. They came from the church and they said, "You're all right, you're all right." They were there waiting for me at the bus station. Well, that was my experience at Johnson C. Smith. I had full scholarship there. And then I went, Dr. Stevens says, "Come on back here to Lincoln." No, my first job was pastor one of the oldest black Presbyterian churches in the country, it was called Washington Street Presbyterian Church in Reading, Pennsylvania. My wife and I moved there, and we lived in the manse, which was the second and third floor above the church. And my son was born in Reading, and I pastored there a few years and had a run-in. I organized a protest move because I was into protesting. Roy Frankhauser, the American Nazi Party head in Pennsylvania, he put a swastika on our church and all of that, and I protested against him. Then I was also involved in campaigning for Milton Schaap to be the first Jewish governor of Pennsylvania. And Roy Frankhauser sent out somebody to shoot me. He had a violent case and so on, and I told the police, and they went and found he had a gun in there. And so while I was at there, Dr. Stevens contacted me and says, "Bethel, come on to Lincoln, I need you. I need you as my assistant chaplain." And they're looking for a director of the Student Center. The first thing, said, you're capable of doing that. And so Dr. Schwabel, the president of Temple, was president at Lincoln at the time. And he said, "Yeah, come on, Bethel," and so on. Long story short, they hired me as first full-time director of the Student Center at Lincoln University and assistant chaplain to Dr. Stevens. And boy, that was hard work. Amy was born, my son was born at Reading Hospital, and we lived 2 miles from the campus in a little complex. And I would have to stay in that student center until near midnight, especially on the weekends when they had student parties and dances. And then I had to get up, and Dr. Stevens wanted me to open up invocation every Sunday morning. I didn't get much sleep. But it was an interesting experience working for him and working there. Then they hired me as director of counseling for the Institute for Services Education for special students coming in. And this occurred right in 1968-69 when Dr. Martin Luther King was assassinated. Then comes a vice president from New Brunswick Theological Seminary campus, and Dr. Stevens sent him over to my office, and he says, "Bethel, how would you, we looked at your academic record, how would you like to come into a combined master's doctorate program at New Brunswick Seminary and Rutgers University?" I said, "Fine." I told my wife, she said, "We're going to move again," because she was working in Oxford, Pennsylvania as an early childhood specialist, so she finished early childhood education. And I said, "It'd be an opportunity for you to apply to Rutgers, and you graduate with honors." And so anyway, she did get into Rutgers on a scholarship, and we had our daughter was born at Lincoln. It was Lincoln Hospital right down in Philadelphia. She was born there, so we had 2 children. And so I said, "Now where am I going to live?" He said, "We're going to put you in the missionary house, right next to a professor's house." I said, "That sounds good." Right in the center of Rutgers University campus. And this was 1969. And when I got there, they started a program called Urban University Program. They were looking for somebody. They said, you know, you fit the bill. The vice president called me over and said, you fit the bill as a director of counseling for this program for African American students in New Brunswick to come into Rutgers University. This all happened, there were protests going on to include blacks into the university setting. Rutgers, as you know, came out of the old Ivy League setting, Rutgers College, along with Princeton, yeah, but they were state related, but they had that Ivy mentality. It was all male, they didn't like women, they didn't care for blacks. But anyway, they said, we're going to try these challenges. And so I became director of counseling for the Urban University Program, which became Urban University Department. I had a choice. It was a Master's of Arts in Theology at New Brunswick Seminary, connected to either a PhD in psychology, a Doctor of Social Work at the School of Social Work, or a Doctor of Philosophy of Education in the School of Ed. Well, at the School of Ed was Dr. Samuel DeWitt Proctor, and who was the Martin Luther King chair, chose Martin Luther King chair, and then James Wheeler, who was the existentialist and pragmatist. And I said, I like the sound of those, and I looked into it, and I said, I'm going there. I'm not interested in going into PhD in psychology. I'm not interested in social work. So I made that connection. And all of this was on scholarship. They gave me full scholarship. When I got on the staff at Rutgers, they said, you know, being a staff member, I didn't have to pay tuition. So here I got, for 2 masters and a doctorate, I didn't have to pay any tuition. and so in 1970, Sam Proctor was the first to teach an African American history course in the School of Education at the graduate level. It was very popular. You can get over 100 graduate students. He sort of helped with the initiative and got a program started at Rutgers College in African Afro-American Studies. And they were looking for people. Now, Dr. Sam Stevens taught me what was called Negro history at Lincoln University, so I had the background in it. And let me just say this, while I was in Reading, Pennsylvania, I taught African American history to the OEO students from the high school. Okay. And so I had the background. And so they hired me. I was the first black at the assistant instructor level, the lowest level. I was the first black hired at that lowest level in the history of Rutgers College and moved up to senior rank. And I helped to develop the department of, they hired a director, but I taught the first course in Introduction to Africana Studies. And I had 250 students. Every black student in all the 5 campuses, New Brunswick, came to my course. And there were a few white students. And so I didn't know what all of that meant. We lived in the missionary house. We would get in protests with the white students at Rutgers College and anti-war movement. We would get in the protest with them, march down College Avenue. There were some interesting days, and we had our 2 children in wheelchairs and so on. At any rate, that was an interesting process for that. You know, and I spent 42 years on the faculty at Rutgers University. I linked the undergraduate program. I chaired the discipline for 15 years. I linked program at the School of Ed. I taught Sam Proctor's after he passed away. In fact, before he passed away, he retired as Martin Luther King chair and came to teach in my department. And during all that time, I won the highest teaching award, the Warren I. Sussman Teaching Award. There were only 4 faculty at the time who got it, and I was one. I won the Paul Robeson Scholar at Rutgers. And so we went through 42 years of that, and the 3 years at Lincoln, so 45 years in higher education. also, I became pastor at the Bethel Presbyterian Church in Plainfield, where I lived. It was a part-time. Rutgers would not allow holding two jobs. They would fire you. But we worked out a situation because Dr. Samuel Proctor was also a pastor at the Abyssinian Church in Harlem, and so he had the same kind of arrangement. You know, you could only make a certain salary, and the university had me as part-time, but the church had me as full-time. I worked my tail off. I didn't get any holidays or anything. And as a result, in 1990, I ended up in the hospital. A major artery burst, and this was from a football injury. And I was in the hospital a couple of months, and so on. I recovered from that. And when I came back, the provost said, "Bethel, what are you going to do? Are you going to stay here with us, or are you going to go to the church? You got to do one thing. You can't do it. Your body is not going to allow you to do both." I said, "I'm going to go with my pension, the university, and my health plan," and so on. I said, "I got to give all of that up." and of course, you'll forgive me, it's much better than what the Presbyterian Church was offering. You know, I mean, my retirement is stock. Yeah. You know, I mean, and I got a lot of dough right now. I mean, my retirement was TIA Clerk.
Okay.
And so, but at any rate, my wife went on her master's and ABD in early childhood education, became professor of early childhood education at the Raritan Valley Community College and first director of the early childhood program. And I taught the first African American history course at Raritan Valley Community College. And so there was been a long history like that. When I retired from Rutgers University, the president and board of governors gave me Professor Emeritus. Now, out of the 30 faculty that retired, only 4 of us got Professor Emeritus. It's not something you get just because you retire. You had to be selected. And so I received Professor Emeritus. And so it's been like that. And then in 2021, Lincoln University gave me a Doctor of Humane Letters. I have an honorary doctorate. And I was inducted in the Athletic Hall of Fame in 2012. And all during that time I've been writing. I have 2 books ready for publication, which will make 8 books. I have written, I've been on television 3 times with my work. I've written a history of Lincoln educating African leaders, and that was published by Lincoln University Press. I've written a book that was used as required reading for the intro course called Intro Africana and Introduction and Study. It's an edited work. It's a 700-page book. Kendall Hunt Press published that. Most of my books were with University Press of America. The book that I'm having come out now is on the history of sports at Lincoln University, where I was inducted in the Athletic Hall of Fame. And it's about a 500 or 600-page book. It's the president of Lincoln University is writing now, president of the foreword. I'm trying to get Dr. Holloway, the president of Rutgers University, to write the foreword. I wrote the history of Africana, which at Rutgers University was not only in New Brunswick, but was on the Newark campus and the Camden campus, and I did research it. And the interesting thing about that research, I told the librarians at each of the major libraries that I could not travel back and forth from Pennsylvania to New Jersey and on the campus and move around the way I used to physically. And they said, well, you're Professor Emeritus, we'll hire a PhD candidate. And each one hired a PhD candidate. They sent me all kinds of material. I didn't have to travel. They emailed me stuff, they mailed me stuff, and so I was able to write the history there. And that is presently being typed for publication. So my interest right now is writing, and I sort of picked up on my mother being an English teacher, and the things she used to really argue with me. You write split infinitives. She used to really get on me. But I love writing, and it's a passion with me now. And I like the whole research process and publication. And so this has been my life process. And And of course, you know, I'm involved with the Oxford Presbyterian Church. Right now they have me as a pastor of pastoral care. I'm not doing a good job at it because I'm been trying to take care of my wife. I can't travel as much as I used to. My back is, I have 4 pins in my lumbar. This is from football. And Dr. McCarroll at Rothman operated on me. And I was 6'4" at the time, and he made me 6'1", 6'2". I said, man, you made me shorter. He said, well, you're alive, aren't you? And so, and then, you know, I wear the brace on my right ankle from football. I had 4 broken ribs, they healed up. And then I have a pin this long with a ball on it in this left hip, and that's from the heavyweight wrestling. It was a 2-time semifinal. And then I got an offer to play with the Cleveland Browns.
Wow.
Yeah, I knew Coach Paul Brown. He wrote me a letter to come to practice. Back in 1961, they didn't have, it was a little different the way they did contracts back then. But I went, when I got the letter, I took it to the dean at Johnson C. Smith, and I said, I'm going to play professional football, and I want to come back to finish up my work. He said, do you know how scholarships work? You lose your scholarship. I said, what do you mean? He said, you don't own that scholarship, but it goes to the next person. Anyway, you'll make enough money playing professional football, you pay when you come back. And he says, you're going to lose your girl and you're going to lose your scholarship. Because I was walking around campus holding Veronica's hand. And I said, maybe, and I told Coach Paul Brown, I said, I can't do this, you know, I didn't want to lose my wife and I didn't want to lose my scholarship. He said, you'll make 4 times, you're in the Presbyterian ministry, you make 4 times more. And I said, well, listen, both your tackles are all pro. All through high school and college, I never sat the bench. I'm not going to play second fiddle to an all-pro tackle. I play. He said, well, you can't, not the first year. So I said, no. I said, I don't care about the money. I'm staying where I'm keeping my scholarship. And so that's been my life pattern. And, you know, we moved the land that we live on now. When I was a boy growing up, I was in teens, I was a counselor at a camp for Leah Lane. Leah Lane was a social activist. She was one of the organizers in the Martin Luther King March. She sat down with President Harry Truman and desegregated the troops. She was in close association with A. Philip Randolph during the first March on Washington in 1941, which formed the Fair Employment Practice Act and Commission. And so I knew her well. I was her counselor. And she had a camp for inner city boys during the 50s. My brother is now deceased. My brother was active. He was A1 draft. I was A1, but one of the motivating things academically for me, my draft person said, if you keep a B above average, I won't draft you. So that's what I did. But my brother had a little problem with that. And he went on to and took tests and became he was 6'2", he met all the requirements, he was in the old guard. Jackie Kennedy chose him to march the funeral of her husband. He's buried only 75 yards from the eternal flame. The old guard gave him a gun salute. So he died with honor. And I have his flag, they gave it to me in my study. And so I miss the idea I didn't go on to play professional football because I know I could have made all pro there. I was good. I played against Herb Adderley, the Green Bay Packers. I knew him well. Lenny Moore, the Baltimore Colts. I knew Jim Brown, didn't play against him. But I think I was good enough to really, you know, stand down in pro, but I took a different route. And so that's been basically my life story. And right now I'm tied up in research and publication and in my writing and taking care of my wife. And I preach when they ask me. They don't ask me that much. I preach, you know, I don't encourage because it kind of takes me away from my writing. But I love speaking. I love lecturing. I miss the university life. And I'm writing and I'm publishing. My major work is going to be rewriting this Bible. And so that's where I am now.
As would be expected from someone of your stature, most of the questions we had prepared, you already went through. But I did have just a couple things, particularly because this particular audience is going to be, from our website as the Presbytery. So, particularly through the lens of a minister of Word and Sacrament, how have you seen the ministry change in your time, in your vocation?
In the Presbyterian Church or in general?
Either or both.
I think you have to look at it in a holistic sense.
Okay.
When you look at the Protestant Church in America, I think we're seeing a lot of evangelistic work going on. Church growth seems to be, this includes the Baptists, the Methodists, and Presbyterians on evangelism. And the church has been affected by the COVID period. The church right now is up against a real challenge. One, the AI, the artificial intelligence, which artificial is the word for me, it is artificial. It has affected the church. And also the stay home thing on worship. A lot of people are staying home watching church service at home now since the COVID period. Technology has taken a grip over, the general practice of the church. So as a result, the church generally does not have much effect on social issues and social change, as it did during the 60s with Martin King and other ministers and so on. And the emphasis has moved away from pastoring leadership to just ministers in evangelism, evangelical behavior. The church is in trouble right now. I think the Presbyterian Church is in trouble. When I look at, I don't know about Pennsylvania, but in New Jersey, Elizabeth Presbytery has been engulfed in another setup in presbyteries, which I don't think is a good trend. They had to combine because church membership has dropped and there's not as much participation. Ministers are now much more geared towards the idea of preaching and leadership rather than pastoring. There's a difference between a pastor and a minister. You can hold the title as minister and a preacher, but there's a difference between a preacher, minister, and a pastor. A pastor who visits the sick, a pastor who reaches out, a pastor who has concern for social issues in the community and reaching out to people. That part is eliminated. And I think that we need to rejuvenate our seminary education. I think there needs to be change. One of the things I'd like to do is to require the Aramaic be introduced into theological education, especially in the Presbyterian Church. This is the language that Jesus spoke and wrote. There's enough literature right now for a course. And then I think there needs to be more emphasis on pastoring and theological education as opposed to just theological emphasis. Theological emphasis is good to understand from the theological perspective, but it doesn't make a good pastor. And so I think that right now the church is up against a challenge in that sense. We're losing out on the most important part of what ministry means, pastoring.
And my other question that I have for you, first of all, listen to your life story and think about, as my dad would say, what God gave you up here. Heaven forbid if you had gone with the Cleveland Browns and had that injury. So God works things out for you to go the way you need to go for such a time and place as this. We are recording this 36 days out from a presidential election. your life story has interfaced so much with things that are happening in our culture. Someone's going to be watching this, looking at not just their ministry, but their sense of vocation, what God is calling them to do and be. What's your word to someone in such a time and place as this about vocation and ministry, given your experience?
Well, I would say that, have concern for people where you are pastoring. Have concern for the sick and the downtrodden. Have concern for the poor and the needy. Be uplifting in leadership. Not just a preacher becoming famous and building large congregations, but be a pastor for the people. Where two or three gather together, there is in the midst of them. Be a pastor. That would be I don't care how well you preach.
Mm-hmm.
I don't care what titles you have as a minister, but I do care how you pastor. We need pastors more than preachers and ministers. And that's what I would tell a person, that this is what you need to go. And one of the things, I took this into the classroom with me.
Mm-hmm.
And a part of my teaching was counseling. Today, there are 10 students that call me Pop and Dad.
Mm-hmm.
And they come out to Doylestown and bring food and so on. These are people who are in professions. Because they said they wouldn't have made it if it wasn't for me. I said, no, I didn't give you any money. But I gave them something in terms of an idea of service. And whatever you do, as a doctor, a lawyer, an educator, being a servant of the people. A good leader is a servant. A good leader is not a leader. A good leader is a servant of the people. And that's what is missing. It's missing in medicine. It's missing in law. It's missing in ministry. It's missing in education. The being a servant of the people. And that would be my vocational view.
Thank you so much. Any last words that you would like to say during this interview that maybe I didn't set you up for, but you wanted to make sure that you shared? Anything else you'd like to let the folks know?
I tell you, and the things that I did, I don't put much emphasis on this, but one of the things that I created some courses that they accepted at the university, but I'm proud of. When I look back at it, I didn't realize that I had, of course, I've been on editorial boards, I've been, and so on, but I was so happy about, I was inducted into the Oxford Round Table in England. I received the Distinguished Service Award from Rutgers University Grad School of Education. I received an Outstanding Community Service Plaque from Johnson C. Smith University. I made Who's Who. I was a Phi Delta Kappa from Rutgers University, Woodrow Wilson Fellow, Who's Who among African Americans. Anyway, it's just, I think all of that is not because I was a leader, but because I was a servant. I say that, I brought those out because it wasn't the leadership, it was the service. They gave me those. And when I was president of the Frontiers International, I wrote, one of my books is The History of the Frontiers International. It's a service organization. It was, predominantly African American, and not any longer. It was all male, but it's now co-ed. It's in 48 states and Africa and the Caribbean. And it's advancement through service is the motto. And I love being a part of that. Advancement comes through service, not through leadership. The best leaders are servants. I think this message comes out clearly in Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. This is the Jesus that we follow, the servant.
thank you on behalf of not just the Presbytery of Philadelphia, but all those lives that you've touched throughout the years. And it's such a joy and a privilege that you took the time to sit down and talk with us and spend so much of your life as part of the Presbytery of Philadelphia.
But let me just say this.
Yeah.
I think the effort on my wife and I with our children, our son is a chief neurosurgeon now,
Okay.
and our daughter is an attorney and a vice president of a museum in Atlanta, Georgia. So we keep up the tradition. And our grandchildren all finished college. One is an All-American lacrosse player and engineer. Another is an All-American water polo player and in medical school. And so we're passing down something.
There you go.
And we're happy about that.